Really no promises, but there are so many successful stories now that someone in your state, stage 4 cancer, you had lymphoma, they got nothing to lose. Like they
No,
might as
exactly.
well give it a shot, see how they
Mm.
feel, give it a month or two. They don't have to completely turn their back on centralized medicine if they don't want to. They can do all the other things and it will support themselves psychologically. It will support their immune system. It will support their metabolism, and it will improve the odds that they emerge through whatever treatment it is better.
Hello everyone, I'm David. I am a strength and conditioning coach originally, a breathwork coach, and I'm also a stage 4 follicular lymphoma survivor. I've been stage 4 twice in 2 years. I did 3 years of chemotherapy treatments. I also had stage 3 kidney disease, liver disease, and I also had a large tumor that was wrapped around my aorta. And now I am 11 years in remission. I have no evidence of disease, and I'm fighting fit and getting back into the gym, rebuilding my health and my life. Today I'm speaking to Dr. Thomas Seager, a cold plunge specialist. He's an engineer. He got into cold plunge, now is a co-founder of Morozko Forge ice baths. He's also the author of Uncommon Testosterone and Uncommon Cold. He's done a lot of research into the cold plunge therapy and cold therapy in general. And I consider cold therapy to be one of the key modalities that has helped me to rebuild my health. So I hope you enjoy this interview. It's got a lot of great information.
Yeah. First off, how does an engineer get into cold therapy?
I read a book that said cold showers would toughen me up. And I thought, well, I want to be tougher. I was separated from my wife. We weren't divorced at the time. My daughter had just graduated high school, and I got to, get myself healthy and get out on the dating market. So I was reading all the self-help literature books that, I could find. And one of them said, well, men, you should take cold showers. And, I'm going to try it. I hated every minute of every cold shower I have ever taken. They're miserable. They make me angry. But I understood sort of the psychology of doing difficult things. The problem is that I live in Phoenix, Arizona. It's the hottest city in North America. And even the water in the wintertime, it's end of January right now. It's winter here in Phoenix. The water's not very cold. And so as things warm up in Phoenix, as we go into the summer, there's no such thing as a cold shower. But I got a call from a former student of mine. I teach engineering at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. And my former student was part of this Burning Man group, local club in Phoenix. He said, have you ever heard of Wim Hof? No, I'd never heard of it. Well, we're having this sort of ice bath breathing thing. You should come over and give it a try. Totally different. I found out later that partial body cold water stimulation will activate the sympathetic division of the central nervous system. So this is your fight or flight response. But you never get the dive reflex. You get the gasp reflex from the cold shower. And so it revs you up, but you never get that parasympathetic division associated with the dive reflex when your brain goes down into a meditative state and your pulse slows down and everything relaxes. So the very first time I did an ice bath, it was one of those stock tanks, and we put, lots of bags of ice in there, and everybody, it's very dramatic. Everybody thought this was going to be a big deal, and I found it so much better than cold showers. I was hooked. That was really the origin of Morozko. Is my former student and we wanted to keep doing ice baths. It kept getting hotter and hotter in Phoenix. It could be 45 degrees C here in the backyard. And we were buying so much ice. We said, this is ridiculous. We got to build a machine that will make its own ice. That was 2018. January 2019, we sold our first Morozko. So that, I kind of got in, on a lark, and I found it was so fun that I kept doing it.
How does that take you into the research behind it?
Well, that was a little bit different. We started really recreationally. It felt good. It was social. It was fun to do. I got a Kenmore Sears chest freezer. At one point I said, well, this is getting ridiculous, all this buying ice. And I put this big old chest freezer on my balcony to try and save myself some trouble. And it was kind of disgusting. I mean, looking back, I didn't like it, but it made it easier. When I finally got my blood labs done, you go to the lab, you have your blood drawn, and they're going to do a lipid panel and the male health panel. It includes testosterone, and it includes something called the prostate specific antigen, or PSA test. And I think I was 52 or 53 at the time. And it's a very standard thing for, a middle-aged man to get his PSA checked. Everything came back fine as far as the blood markers go, except that damn PSA. 7.0 was my result. And the lab report had a red exclamation mark on it saying out of range. Now, I ordered all my labs myself. I didn't go through a urologist or a physician or anything. And so when I got that lab report saying my PSA was too high, I had to go online and say, well, what the heck is a PSA? What does this mean? And it takes about 2 minutes of surfing the internet looking for health information to convince a man that he's going to die of prostate cancer. All these catastrophic thoughts, they're going through my mind. And all the advice online says, well, you have an inflamed prostate. You have to go see a urologist. You got to get a biopsy. I didn't want any of that. So instead of seeing a doctor, I called up some friends, and it was kind of an awkward conversation because men probably don't talk enough about this. But I would say, hey, have you ever had your PSA checked? And it turns out all my friends had this test, all at the request of their doctor. Several of them came back too high. And they started telling me stories about how painful and dangerous the biopsy is. One of my best friends, he'd had the prostatectomy as a precaution, just in case he had cancer. And that meant that he's never going to get an erection for the rest of his life. There was no way I was signing up for that, because here I am, single, dating again, and I'm thinking, no woman is ever going to love me if I have my prostate removed and I can never get a hard on. So I said, either I'm going to die of prostate cancer or I'm going to figure out another way to deal with this inflammation. What I decided to do was a ketogenic diet. I would go in and out, like 4 days on keto and 3 days off, and ice baths every single day. I started getting into that ice bath, not because I was trying to, recover from a workout or cut weight or do something super athletic. I got into that ice bath because I was scared. I was afraid that inflammation was cancer, and I wasn't going to go the standard allopathic route to deal with it. So instead, I did the ice baths. It took me 4 months to have the courage to go back to the lab and get my blood drawn again. And when I did, 1.8, no elevated risk of prostate cancer, no inflammation to speak of, totally healthy result. I went back, I think it was a month later, because you got to monitor these things, I was thinking. And I got the full male health panel again. I was down to 1.5 or 1.1 on the PSA, and my total testosterone came back 1180 nanograms per deciliter. Now, in Australia, you might measure in moles, and so you got to do the conversion. But this 1180 nanograms per deciliter, guess what? It had a red exclamation mark next to it. It said, too high. My total testosterone was way off the charts, especially considering that, I was a sedentary college professor in my mid-50s. So I now had a clean bill of health, at least as far as the PSA goes. And I said, all right, I'll go visit the urologist. I'll take my blood labs, I'm going to get like a big pat on the back. But that's not what happened. He took a look at my lab reports and he said, I want one more test. It was luteinizing hormone. Now, I didn't know what luteinizing hormone was, and it wasn't one of those things that I could order myself. But he says, let's take a look at your luteinizing hormone. I had to look it up. That's what stimulates a man's testicles to produce testosterone in the first place. So if my total testosterone was high, but my luteinizing hormone was low, then my urologist would have said, Professor Seager, you got to get off the juice. He would have accused me of taking steroids. And most medical doctors think that total testosterone will drive prostate cancer. He would have advised me to stop, taking steroids or I'm going to get prostate cancer. He would have tried to scare me. Now, here's the thing. Total testosterone protects against prostate cancer. And we have 40 years of data showing this. But still, medical doctors are thinking the opposite. And I don't know why that misconception is so popular and persistent. But one of my friends who had his prostatectomy also told me that his doctor put him on testosterone suppression, which was harming his health because it feminizes him. It's like as if not being able to get an erection weren't bad enough. Now you're taking away the hormone that makes him feel energetic, that makes him feel alive. Of course, his body composition went to crap. He gained about 25 pounds of fat, and his doctor told him this was to minimize his risk of prostate cancer, which is wrong. My luteinizing hormone came back 8.9, off the charts. I was totally natural, and I never heard from my urologist again. But that's really what got me into this research. You were asking, I think, about cancer, diabetes, and sex hormones, and they all have something in common. It is the mitochondria. Cancer originates in mitochondrial dysfunction. Diabetes, as you know, is insulin resistance because the mitochondria are damaged. And all sex hormones originate in the mitochondria. It is mitochondria that are the common thread between cancer, type 2 diabetes, and sex hormone levels. And that's why when a man or a woman, for that matter, is messed up in one area, it's very likely that they are also messed up in others. Insulin resistance, which is sometimes called pre-diabetes, is associated with increased risk of cancer because the origins of the two diseases are the same. They begin with damaged mitochondria. One of the best things that you can do for your mitochondria is cold water immersion therapy. It is the fastest way to stimulate mitobiogenesis. It will recruit brown fat to your body, even as an adult. There's another major medical misconception. Until about 15 years ago, medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in an adult human being. That also turned out to be wrong. So when you recruit this brown fat, the brown fat is packed with mitochondria. And ostensibly, the mitochondria is there to fuel what's called non-shivering thermogenesis, to defend your core body temperature in the cold. The brown fat will convert glucose and fats in your bloodstream into heat to keep you warm when you're in the ice bath. But the brown fat does so much more. It's in constant communication with the thyroid. It's regulating your metabolism. People with more brown fat have a higher association with all kinds of health outcomes that are characteristic of long, healthy, high-quality lives because their metabolism is in better shape and their mitochondria are in better shape. And here's the mind-blowing thing. I just learned this a few months ago from Martin Picard at Columbia University. The mitochondria made in your fat cells can travel through your body. There are mitochondria, free mitochondria in your bloodstream. I had no idea that this was the case. And a new study came out in 2025 that showed mitochondria can travel from fat cells to damaged heart muscle tissue and repair the mitochondrial function elsewhere in the body. So when you get into the cold water, and it doesn't have to be for very long, if you're starting a practice, you just go cold enough to gasp. If you feel that, then you know you're activating that sympathetic division. And then you go long enough, if you're just starting out, to feel the urge to shiver. You don't have to go any longer than that. But after about 2 weeks, you will have brown fat. You will be somewhat acclimated to the cold. You don't even have to shiver anymore. You just do 2-3 minutes at a freezing cold temperature that makes you gasp. Your brown fat will be activated. Your metabolism will be elevated for hours after your ice bath, and you will begin to get metabolically healthy. The metabolic health means healthy, lower risk of cancer or improved cancer treatment outcomes if you already have cancer. It means a boost or a stabilization, if you're a woman, in your sex hormone levels. It's associated with healthier body composition, that is less visceral fat, more subcutaneous fat. But a lot of people who are using it to lose weight, they find out they lose, maybe 5, 10, or even a little bit more pounds, which is the way we measure weight in the United States. And then they don't lose a lot more from the ice baths. They need to do other things. Their body composition can improve, but ice baths are not a reliable long-term weight loss mechanism. I'm living proof of that. If ice baths were really going to cut fat, I would be ripped. But I'm still a 59-year-old fat guy.
I find that this is the good thing about engineers. They look at the whole clock, not just one cog that makes, there's a whole lot of other things that actually contribute as well. And there's something I'd like to get across to people as well. It's not just one thing that's going to get you there. But it's great what you're talking about, the cold regulation there too. It's all relative to how you've trained your autonomic nervous system too. You're training your nervous system to cope with different levels of cold, and that eventually gets colder and colder. Another great thing there too, you're talking about the brown adipose tissues. Cold therapy, it also browns white adipose tissue, and you get beige fat.
Correct.
So you're actually producing more, which is going to actually obviously help with the production of more. Does that actually help with the production of more healthy mitochondria?
Correct. The beiging of the white fat is the mitobiogenesis. It is the production of new mitochondria in a white fat cell that equips that to perform non-shivering cold thermogenesis. So there's white fat, beige fat, brown fat, and the distinctions, I don't know if they're all that important, but the color of the fat is related to the density of mitochondria in the cell. White fat cells, they don't need mitochondria. It's not their job to convert the energy. It's their job to store the energy. But brown fat isn't an energy storage cell. It's an energy conversion cell where it's going to produce heat. What a lot of people don't realize is that brown fat is also an essential secretory organ. That is, it has a job in the body. There's hormones called now bradykines. So these are particular to the brown fat, produced by the brown fat cells, and they signal other reactions in the body that keep us healthy. When you lose all of your brown fat, you are missing that essential secretory organ and those bradykines. It is no wonder that people become thyroid dysregulated, because their thyroid is supposed to be working in concert with the brown fat, constantly making adjustments. Without the brown fat there to modulate its function, the thyroid could go hyper or hypo until the brown fat is restored.
So how does that relate to the hormone release when we're talking about, say, for example, people in colder climates often complain they don't get enough sunlight, so they try to supplement with D3, for example?
Let's talk about our conventional understanding of the way that vitamin D, which is a hormone, actually, it's a complicated set of hormones. It's not just one vitamin or one molecule. Vitamin D is a whole metabolic system inside your body. And we only measure about 2 different forms in a classic blood marker test, which makes the blood test somewhat unreliable. If you're searching for severe deficiency or insufficiency, the blood test can reveal that. But the blood test gives you such a narrow snapshot of what's really going on in the body with vitamin D that it is not a way to optimize your health. It's only a way to identify a serious deficiency. Vitamin D, ordinarily, the way we think about it, is made in the skin. UVB light, which most parts of the extreme latitudes is not available in the winter. It's only available during the long summer days when the sun is highest overhead. That's when the UVB will make it through the atmosphere and reach your skin. There, it will intersect cholesterol and convert that cholesterol into what's called pre-vitamin D. Then the pre-vitamin D is further metabolized into all different forms of vitamin D. This happens in the skin, but vitamin D is stored in the fat. It is lipophilic. That is, it avoids the water phase and it partitions into the fat phase. So how's it going to get there? When it's made in the skin, it needs to travel through the body until it finds a place where it can be stored. During the summer, human beings will store up vitamin D that is then slowly released from fat cells during the winter. Almost every single cell in the human body has vitamin D receptors. This tells you how essential vitamin D is to every single bodily function, but it is particularly important to the immune system. A child, when it's born, does not have a mature immune system. It develops principally in the first year of life. This is when the development of the child's immune system is most rapid. Because my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 6 years old, I had to learn about metabolism. I had to learn about insulin. And one of the things that I discovered is that type 1 diabetes, as an autoimmune disorder, is associated with an insufficiency of vitamin D in the first year of life. I didn't know this. I didn't know this when I was a parent. I didn't know this when he was a baby. This study only reached me a year after he was diagnosed. But it goes further than that. Every single autoimmune condition is associated with some kind of vitamin D irregularity, either at the first year of life when the immune system is developing or later on in life, or both. You also probably know that when vitamin D levels get low, we're more susceptible to infection. It's why the cold season or the flu season happens in the winter at extreme latitudes, because without that sunlight on our skin, vitamin D levels typically drop and we become more susceptible to a viral infection. The immune system runs on vitamin D. But here's the new revelation. Mitochondria make their own light. Ordinarily, the light for vitamin D photosynthesis is coming from the sun, right? It's on our skin. But this is the kind of thing that once it's explained, you're like, oh, that's obvious. And nobody thinks of it ahead of time. The mitochondria also make light, and they make it inside the body. They can't help it. It is the mitochondria that move electrons around. They're the ones that facilitate respiration. So if you've got a hydrocarbon, like a fat or glucose, and you're going to combine it with oxygen, you've got to move electrons off the hydrocarbon onto the oxygen to make carbon dioxide and water. When you move electrons, or let me rephrase that. When electrons move, they emit light. And the wavelength of light depends upon the shell that the electron is moving from one atom to another atom. We know mitochondria make light because they make heat. Heat is infrared light, and it's thousands of nanometers in wavelength. That's what non-shivering thermogenesis is. It is the production of light inside the brown fat cell in response to the cold. David, some of that light is in the UVB range. So we're talking approximately 300 nanometers, not all of it, but some of it. And when it is released by the mitochondria inside the brown fat cell, it will intersect a cholesterol molecule. It will convert that cholesterol to pre-vitamin D, and then it will be further metabolized into other forms of vitamin D. But it never has to enter the bloodstream because it's already in a fat cell where it belongs. The only reason it would be released into the bloodstream is if the body needed it somewhere else. If the body was saying, okay, some of these other cells with the vitamin D receptors need that vitamin D, we're going to get it out of that brown fat cell, circulated through the bloodstream to make it available elsewhere. So I published this article that got some attention. And then this Polish study, they were looking at women with multiple sclerosis. This is just a few months old, so this is 2025. Now, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder. And remember, all autoimmune disorders are associated with irregularities of vitamin D metabolism. So these scientists in Poland were very concerned about vitamin D levels for these women with multiple sclerosis. They put these women in the cryotherapy chamber and measured their vitamin D levels before and after. And this is the first study in the world that showed cryotherapy alone, not diet, not sunshine, just cryotherapy could elevate blood serum levels of vitamin D. But it only did that to a significant extent in the women with MS. The women without the MS, which were serving as a comparison group, they got like an 8% boost. It was fairly modest, but the women with MS got a significant boost. Now, why would that be? Somewhere in their body, the women with the multiple sclerosis needed that extra vitamin D. They weren't storing it in the brown fat cells. Now, this is my hypothesis. It was released from the brown fat into their body in an attempt to correct their disorders of vitamin D associated with their MS. In the healthy women, I'm not surprised that they got a little boost. It was wintertime in Poland. That's not a very sunny time. And a little boost was probably all they needed. So now we have direct clinical evidence that cold stimulation of brown fat is not just producing light, which is converting cholesterol to pre-vitamin D in theory. It is doing it in practice, inside your body. And when you step back and think about it, how could it not? How do you think, our ancestors survived those long, dark winters? You think it was eating like baby seal blubber or something like that? Fish and animal sources can provide some vitamin D, but the best vitamin D is what you're making yourself. And cold will stimulate you to do that. The vitamin D disorders only show up in a population after you lock them indoors during the winter, after you give them central heat, after you take away all their outdoor chores. They're not missing UVB because the UVB isn't in that light. They're missing the cold. The light that they're missing in the winter is made inside their own body. This is a revelation.
Exactly. That's what I keep telling people, that they never had D3 deficiencies, 100 years ago. Our ancestors never had this problem. So why are we having it now? With the introduction of hot, cold water, comfort, and so on. But
correct.
That's why it isn't. But it's all fascinating stuff. It really is, and it just shows like that study with the women with MS, that's incredible. It's like there's more wisdom in the human body than there is in all of philosophy, human philosophy.
Of course.
It's one of my favorite quotes. I forget who said it actually, but yeah, it's true, 100%. It's incredible. For me, I've been doing this a long time. I do the ice baths every day for at least 10 to 20 minutes. I believe it should be a standard practice, especially for people with cancer. It should be at least part of their treatment protocols. Have you seen anything or anywhere where they actually started adopting cold therapy for this kind of disease or diabetes or anything else?
A friend of mine and I, he's at University of Alabama, Birmingham. We just submitted a proposal to the National Institutes of Health to study cold water immersion therapy and type 2 diabetes. The evidence is really good that someone with type 2 diabetes who begins a regular practice of deliberate cold exposure will improve their insulin sensitivity. The only question is, how long does it take them to reverse their condition so that they no longer meet the diagnostic criteria of type 2 diabetes? The NIH turned that proposal around and rejected it without even bringing it to the review panel. In other words, the few people, and it only takes like 3, who read it said it wasn't even worthy of discussion. Despite Jay Bhattacharya in the United States saying we have to do the research that studies chronic illness, the NIH is not going to change their habits just because they have a new director. There are colleagues of mine in academia who will never get in an ice bath. They will never believe a dang thing that I publish. It goes against the infrastructure of health in the United States, which is all designed to funnel money to the pharmaceutical companies, to the HMOs, to the insurance companies that are stewards of that infrastructure, and to the universities. So to answer your question, there is no they that is adopting cold water therapy as part of their standard of care or even advising their patients. But there are some crazy cancer patients out there who are saying, well, I'm going to do it because there are no adverse side effects, because the few studies that have been done on metabolism and cancer outcomes say that, for example, a ketogenic diet will improve cancer outcomes. Because once you understand the mitochondrial origins of cancer and the peculiar metabolism of cancer, now you get super motivated to take care of your mitochondria. Perhaps a healthy mitochondria organelle will signal apoptosis, that is the death of the cancer cell. Perhaps it will equip the body with the energy it needs to correct itself, activate the immune system, and give the body what it needs to get rid of the cancer. But if it doesn't, what have you lost? Nothing.
Exactly.
Exactly right. And so I talk to people, about once a month who have either decided to eschew the allopathic medical approach, no surgery, no chemotherapy, and just do cold or Fenben or ivermectin or other metabolic interventions, including a ketogenic diet, or people who have decided they want to supplement their traditional care with ice baths and a keto diet. People send me their labs and their PET scans showing where they've recruited brown fat and showing me how their tumors are shrinking as a result of this program of cold therapy. And so the best we can do right now is say that we have accumulated case studies in success. Now, you don't have to be convinced. You don't have to be impressed. But if you were Dean Hall, who was diagnosed with chronic leukemia, you might decide that you've got nothing left to lose. He swam the entire length of the Willamette River in his home state of Oregon, and that river was cold. He didn't do it because he thought it was going to save his life. He did it because he wanted to inspire other cancer patients to do something heroic before he died. When he went into that river, he had chronic leukemia. When he came out of that river, he didn't. This is incurable and untreatable. And yet Dean Hall reversed it, and he did it with cold water swimming. So this is what I mean by, what have you got to lose? Exactly right. Yep.
I was the same.
Not the only one.
Stage 4 follicular lymphoma. I was twice stage 4. After 3 years of chemotherapy, even after the 3 years of chemotherapy, they didn't expect me to last much longer. But I'm now 11 years in remission using diet, breath work, and ice baths, the 3 main things. So,
Attaway.
and I'm actually no evidence of disease at the moment. I had a large tumor that now is nothing but scar tissue.
Yep.
So
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's an incredible difference. Beforehand, I was healthy before. Well, I thought I was healthy. I was in the fitness industry. I was fit and I was lean, but it was, I wasn't healthy at all. It was just a fit and lean, but trainer, but obviously wasn't healthy. So
it's funny how you cannot judge the quality of mitochondria by looking at the person. I mean,
not at all.
Sometimes you can. You see someone who's morbidly obese and they're insulin resistant, but it's possible for someone who is fit, lean, handsome to have dysfunctional mitochondria, because obesity is an association with mitochondrial impairment, but it is not a tight causal relationship. There are other things that you can do that are going to damage your mitochondria when your light environment is not right, when you eat too many seed oils, for example, or when your sleep is messed up. Your mitochondria will be messed up too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's so many triggers, especially in today's society. When you look at ultra processed foods, and like you mentioned, seed oils for one. Apart from the omega-6 sort of ratio imbalance, the fact that they are also very powerful xenoestrogens as well, which lower our testosterone and EPO production and blood cell production. So, I mean, this is one of the great things too about cold therapy. You're talking about increasing testosterone production. Testosterone also stimulates the kidneys to produce more erythropoietin, EPO, so that we can produce, which stimulates the bone marrow to produce more blood cells. So this is one of the things I struggled with afterwards, after years of chemotherapy. You are permanently inhibited, like your bone marrow is inhibited to produce platelets and red and white blood cells and so on, and stem cells. But and for years I struggled to actually get that into even just a low normal healthy range.
Yeah.
But with cold therapy and the other things that I do, especially breath work as well, you stimulate my testosterone levels have gone up, my nitric oxide production, my blood cells and platelets, all in a very healthy range. So it's an incredible difference. Yeah.
We should make a distinction between chronic cold and acute. What I mean by acute is brief and freezing and deliberate. Chronic cold is not good for you. Like if you were an outdoor worker and you're working in the winter and you're underdressed, you don't have the right protection, it's very unhealthy. Chronic cold is chronic stress. Too much of what otherwise might be a good thing is not a healthy thing. Too much exercise, too much direct sunlight, and too much cold can tip you over into distress. So what we're talking about now is brief, regular periods of cold water immersion or perhaps cryotherapy that give you that sudden jolt, and then it's over. You'll get a lot of energy for several hours. It'll rev up your metabolism. And here's the most important thing: your mitochondria will have a chance to grow in your sleep. Testosterone is made while you're sleeping. And so if you're not taking care of your sleep, or you're pushing yourself all the time, or you heard one of my podcasts and you think, well, Professor Seager, he does 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to do 30 minutes. I'll get so much more benefit. You're just doing it wrong. Stick with the 3 or 4 minutes after you become acclimated. Every once in a while, of course, you can do more, but you need to give your mitochondria more rest so that it is proportional to the stress that you put them under.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same as any kind of formal training as well. You're also training your autonomic nervous system. So you are increasing your capability to deal with these stresses, these hormetic stresses, which will later sort of help with other things too. But I mean, your nervous system also helps with your hormone production, your blood pressure, heart rate, everything else as well. So getting into that training that ventral vagal state as well is very important. So it's all, I mean, like you said, all in moderation, but regular as well. But you don't have to do it. Maybe you don't have to do it every day, but
Correct.
regularly would be good.
If all you can get is once a week, it's better than nothing. It will help you maintain brown fat. But there was a study at the University of Copenhagen that gets quoted a lot because Susanna Soberg was the lead author and she was on Huberman. She asked these Danish winter swimmers, well, how often do you go jump in the fjord? How long do you stay in there? And so she did this survey and she determined that on average, the Danes in her study did 11 minutes a week. And sometimes they would do it just twice a week, and sometimes they would do it every day, but on average, 11 minutes a week. She was measuring the brown fat in their bodies with positron emission tomography, or a PET scan. And so she reasoned 11 minutes a week of almost freezing cold, like 4 degrees Celsius, because those fjords are cold in Denmark. But about 11 minutes of freezing cold a week must be enough to maintain brown fat in a human body. We don't know what the minimum effective dose is. Nobody has ever investigated this, and there's nothing magic about this 11-minute threshold. It just happens to be the average. If you can get a little bit of cold in your life, it's gonna do you a lot of good. This is just like exercise. You don't have to get 10,000 steps a day to start improving your health. You get 3 or 4 or 5 compared to 1,000, you're going to get a lot of benefit. And so I don't want people to think that they have to be all or nothing. Just get started. If all you've got is a cold shower or a cold bath, do that.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, if you don't have an ice bath or anything like that, then cold shower is the next best thing. You know, and it's all relative as well. What feels cold for someone else is not going to be cold for someone else. So it's kind of what feels cold for you is going to be just as effective. And
you are
right,
so right. Just like
Russians.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly right. Like weight training, isn't it? Is you start small and you work your way up. You know, it's the same for everything.
Don't compare yourself to the guys who have been in the gym for the last 15 years and are pumping huge iron. Just get in there and find a weight that feels like the right level of effort for you when you're doing maybe a dozen reps. This is the rule of thumb that a lot of people will start with. Well, a similar rule of thumb exists in cold water immersion therapy. It's just you won't get it from Google or from Grok or from Claude or something because they haven't caught up to the latest science. You go cold enough to gasp, you go long enough to shiver. And that's a good way to start a cold training program that's analogous to starting a weight training program. Listen to your body in the beginning, and then you will find that as you cold train, you become more cold acclimated. If you can control the temperature like I can in my Morozko, you drop it down. A degree a day, a half a degree C a day is enough to keep challenging you, just like you would add a little bit of weight as you get stronger. And then don't go, once you've hit those freezing temperatures, don't go more than 3 or 4 minutes. It's not the total volume in the weight room that is going to be good for health and longevity. I'm not trying to win any bodybuilding competitions. I'm not trying to look good in a thong. I'm just trying to keep my brain sharp and live a long, healthy life. I probably don't need more than about an hour of exercise a week if I'm going to start a weight training program. And I probably don't need more than a total of like 15 or 20 minutes total of freezing cold water immersion a week.
Yeah, exactly right. So, I mean, I don't know, whenever we try something new, everyone does this, they overdo it, and they want to, like, the first time they get to the gym, they've got to do everything, and then they can't move for a week, you know. So,
right.
You know,
and then they wonder why they don't go back. Right.
Yeah, that's right. And then it's it now. I can't handle that. Move on to something else, you know. So that's what people do. You know, we always sort of get overexcited about it. But the thing is to take your time, one step at a time gets you there, you know. Is there anything else that you find that ice bath or just cold therapy in particular can do that nothing else can actually come close to?
You mentioned the nervous system. There are some physiological markers of this. Probably the best one is heart rate variability. You know that your heart has to adjust to the metabolic demands of the body. If you're going to go up a flight of stairs, your pulse is going to increase because of the additional energy expenditure. But it's even more subtle than that. Heart rate variability is your heart's capacity to adjust the time between beats to whatever your condition is. I'll give you an example. Just breathing will change your heart rate, but so will thinking. If you're working on a crossword puzzle, your heart will respond to fuel your brain. If you're getting yelled at by your boss, or I don't know, you're teaching class and you made a mistake on the chalkboard and you're embarrassed, your heart rate will adjust. So heart rate variability is probably the best physiological measure of your psychological resistance. When your heart is capable of adapting to the conditions, whatever they are, under which you're operating, a high heart rate variability shows a high level of adaptive capacity. It means you can take a lot of stress. You can take a lot of different conditions, and your heart is ready for it. I am much less worried about something like VO2 max. VO2 max, if you're an endurance athlete, is an important measure, but that's not me. I'm worried about, I don't know, getting a parking ticket or my director yelling at me for something that I put on Twitter. I'm not trying to do a triathlon. VO2 max is a measure of metabolic throughput, of metabolic power. Heart rate variability is a measure of metabolic flexibility. And for me, heart rate variability is a much more important metric. Guess what boosts heart rate variability? Cold water immersion therapy. When you get into that cold, you will activate your sympathetic division. You'll get a little bit, a very brief boost in your blood sugar. You'll get a brief boost in your heart rate. That's the gasp reflex. And then the dive reflex takes over. Your brain goes down into that deeper meditative state. Your pulse slows. So you improve both the sympathetic reaction, that's being tested by the stress of the cold, and also the vagal tone associated with the parasympathetic division. Nothing bad can happen to you the whole rest of the day. You know, you get, I don't know, cut off in traffic, or silver drops 30% in one day. I don't know what your portfolio is all in, and you get worried about these things. It's no big deal. Your parasympathetic division is online. It's going to keep you calm. And you're able to say, I don't know, I just did an ice bath. This doesn't seem like such a big deal. So there are benefits psychologically to doing that really hard, uncomfortable thing every single morning. For me, it's always a morning affair, unless it's summertime in Phoenix and I need another one at the end of the day just to cool off. I'm doing mine in the morning so I can start every day with that feeling of accomplishment, with that win. And the weird thing is, the worries just seem to melt into the water. I was watching an Instagram post of a woman who was using cold plunge therapy for PTSD. She said all of her self-talk was catastrophic. She was imagining all of the anxieties coming to life, but only in her imagination, until she started doing the cold plunge therapy and the self-talk changed. It went from catastrophic to optimistic. Oh, think of all the good things that could happen today. There is some relationship between the psychology and the shock and the overcoming, the sense of accomplishment from the cold, that we need to understand better. Heart rate variability is our best physiological measure of what's going on in the central nervous system when people do a regular practice of cold water immersion.
Yeah, that's one of the things we learn with breath work as well. It's interesting that you bring that up actually, because there was a study done some years back. I can't even remember when this was, but you might have heard of this before. But generally speaking, people only have one good scare in them a day. So if you scare yourself, like if you do like a bungee jump, the first one you're gonna be like really freaking out. But then you could bungee jump the rest of the day without feeling that same fear. It's amazing how the nervous system works. You know?
What a great study.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I can't remember where it was, but I'll have to bring that up sometime. But yeah, it was. I just think it's really interesting. It's so relatable too, because you have that same stressor. It's a hormetic stressor, and you've brought yourself up into that nervous state, and then all of a sudden you just calm back down into that ventral vagal state, and you feel like everything else is chill. You know, like
Yep.
the rest of the day you're cool. Like, okay, we'll just manage it. It's good.
There are some studies of cortisol. Most of the studies of cortisol and cold take people who are naive to cold water immersion, plop them in the cold bath, and then draw blood or take saliva, and they notice a spike in cortisol. Now, those subjects who already are high, they don't go any higher. But if you're sort of at this normal or this low level, you can get a spike in cortisol for your first cold bath. But those studies that go on for a couple or 3 weeks show that cortisol spike gets smaller and smaller and smaller as people practice the cold. They get attuned to it. And even though I always feel like I never want to get in that ice bath. Joe Rogan told Matthew McConaughey every day he almost doesn't do it. And that I can relate to that, because the worst part for me are those 15 seconds right before I get into the ice bath. But these studies in the lab, they're not doing freezing chunks of, 0 degree sea water. They're doing what I would call cool plunge therapy. And the people become acclimated. They no longer get the cortisol spike. It's as if their body knows, this is no big deal. They, inoculate themselves against that stress. And at least anecdotally, what readers tell me is that stress inoculation, it goes into other aspects of their life. It's not just cold. It could be anything else that would get them all excited and anxious. They now meet with a general state of calm. They're either more in touch with their body, or maybe it's the study that you're talking about. They sort of used up their one good scare for the day, and now nothing else can get them.
That's certainly what it feels like to me anyway. Like, I mean, before you get in the ice, I had to convince myself, well, this is good for you, like this is training your nervous system. So it takes a few minutes or a few seconds at least to get in, and you're like, okay, now it's cool.
Yep.
It's good. Yeah. So I know that, other things that you've talked about with cold therapy, and you're talking about nitric oxide production, and we're talking about mitochondria before, and we're talking about mitochondrial dysregulation, and the overabundance of reactive oxygen species and so on that causes the mitochondria damage. Where does nitric oxide come into the cold therapy?
This is another big medical misconception. Nitric oxide is produced by the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels. Now, that's really important because that nitric oxide will signal vasodilation. It will cause the smooth muscle tissue that control the diameter of a blood vessel. It will cause that smooth muscle tissue to relax. The diameter of the blood vessel opens up. More blood can flow through that vessel, and it requires a constant production of nitric oxide to maintain that relaxed state, which is kind of counterintuitive. It requires energy to open up those blood vessels. So for a long time, medical doctors thought that the endothelial cells were not using mitochondria to get the energy that they needed to produce this nitric oxide. When you remove the endothelial cell from the body and you study it in the lab, they'd watch the endothelial cells grow, and they noticed that they weren't using mitochondrial respiration. So they said, oh, okay, there aren't a lot of mitochondria in the endothelia anyway, and so they must not be doing the nitric oxide. That turned out to be wrong. This is just 3 or 4 years ago, a definitive study that came out, and it said, no, the nitric oxide is being produced from ATP generated by the mitochondria in the endothelial cells. And this explains a lot, because erectile dysfunction is one of the earliest clinical markers of insulin resistance. It all makes sense. When your mitochondria are impaired, your cells become resistant to the action of insulin. They'd rather the glucose stayed in your bloodstream and only entered the cell slowly, because there's something about the cell that understands the mitochondria aren't ready for that much glucose. So insulin resistance is a way that your cells are protecting your mitochondria from glucose overload and the excess production of reactive oxygen species. A man who has impaired mitochondrial function will be insulin resistant, and he will not be able to maintain an erection because the mitochondria in his endothelial cells are incapable of producing sufficient nitric oxide. Now, there's some things you can do to help him out, but Viagra is not a mitochondrial support. That is, Viagra will overcome insulin resistance. It will power those mitochondria up so that they can make nitric oxide, and now a man can have an erection again. But it doesn't do it by generating new mitochondria. It doesn't do it via mitobiogenesis. It does it by overcoming the insulin resistance that is there to protect the mitochondria. The increased blood flow from Viagra can have lots of benefits, that not just for sexual performance, but also for the brain, for improving perfusion throughout the body and allowing the blood to heal tissues. But it is not a long-term solution to circulatory problems. By contrast, when you do cold water immersion, you stimulate mitobiogenesis. You're making new mitochondria. Instead of overcoming the insulin resistance, you are resolving it. So it was Ben Greenfield who said, an ice bath is like Viagra for your whole body. And he's right. That is, you don't only get an improvement in testosterone levels from the additional mitochondria, but you get an improvement in sex function from the additional mitochondria in your endothelia and the nitric oxide that they produce. You can resolve circulatory disorders doing especially a grounded cold plunge. Now, Morosco is grounded. As soon as you get in there, you're electrically connected to the earth. This reduces the viscosity of your blood and improves your blood flow. And so that's a good, albeit temporary thing. When you do the cold plunge therapy and you're stimulating this mitobiogenesis, that's a good long-term thing for your circulation. The one caveat is high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, chronic, untreated hypertension, you got to be really careful with the cold, because cold is vasoconstriction. It will reduce the diameter of the blood vessels that carry blood to your extremities, to your limbs, for example. It will force that blood into your core, and your blood pressure will go up. There are 2 clinicians who have reported to me incidents of a hypertensive event. So this is dangerously high blood pressure as a result of untreated chronic hypertension doing the ice bath. Go in the sauna first. The sauna will have the opposite effect. The dry sauna will be vasodilation. And so to get your blood pressure under control, don't start with an ice bath. Work the sauna. Hopefully you're not trying to conceive a child, because sauna is terrible for fertility, both men and women. You're just working on your blood pressure. Start with the sauna first. Then as your blood pressure comes down, then you can work more into the ice bath and do the cold.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, breathwork's another avenue there too for hypertension and things like that, because you can regulate your nervous system for a start to help with the high blood pressure. But you also produce more nitric oxide and CO2, which are both vasodilators as well. I mean, there are a few ways that you can start producing more nitric oxide as well, like sunlight for one, Brahmari breathing through the nose and things like that too.
UVA
Oh yeah, it's an amazing.
is particularly good for producing nitric oxide. And there's a lot more UVA in the solar spectrum than there is UVB. So even if it is the winter and you're like, well, I can't get a tan, I'm not going to make any vitamin D today. You go out in the sunshine, make some UVA. It's good for your circulation.
Yeah,
I mean, use the UVA to make some nitric oxide. It's good for your circulation.
Yep, exactly. And again, you know, one of the strongest antioxidants that you can get as well. We produce it ourselves. So there you go. Save people from supplementing it.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of supplements. Jack Cruz has a really good line here. He says, if your body can make it, you don't need to take it. There are exceptions. If you are in an acute state of deficiency or insufficiency, if you've got rickets, take vitamin D supplements, but those are a temporary bridge to buy you time to address whatever the underlying cause of your deficiency is.
No, I agree 100%. On the same, like, I mean, pre-diagnosis, I was pretty much the supplements king. Like I was in the fitness, I took everything. But since I don't take any supplements at all or medications anymore, so there's a number of reasons why supplements are a temporary thing as well. Like you said, if your body can make it, there's no point in supplementing it. You know, antioxidants, especially, we get even glutathione, other things, also nitric oxide from L-arginine. Yeah, most of the antioxidants we produce ourselves, and hormones like D3, testosterone. There's 0 point to supplementing these things unless you have like an acute affect or problem at the time.
There are, however, some elements. Most people are deficient to some extent in magnesium, but if you're doing a regular program of cold, your mitochondria are going to need magnesium. It catalyzes something like 300 metabolic reactions. Mitochondria are very dense in magnesium, and it's mostly stored in the bones. That is, there's very little magnesium in your bloodstream. And so if you do regular cold plunge, but you're not getting enough magnesium in your diet, your body will take it out of your bones. And that's not good for long-term bone health. So there are some things that your body can't make. You can't make magnesium. You can't make zinc. You need a little copper. Some of these elements that we would ordinarily get from seafood or from bathing in salt water, we got to make sure that they're in our diet. I'm not 100% anti-supplement. If someone is taking magnesium chloride, magnesium L-threonate, or some form of magnesium, I think they're doing fine. It's very difficult to overdose on magnesium. So, you know, it's okay to take some.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you have a clean source, though, too. The biggest problem I have with supplements is that they come with a lot of other things, a lot of other problems, and a lot of them have xenoestrogens in them and things like that as well. But you're right, like salts, especially magnesium. I put, what do you think about salts in your ice bath? I use sea salt and also magnesium salts.
I don't use sea salt because it has chloride, and there can be an interaction between the chloride and the ozone that I don't want. The chloride is also more corrosive. I only put sulfate salts. So that would be magnesium sulfate. In our stainless steel tubs, you can put zinc sulfate. You can put a little copper sulfate or potassium sulfate. And so now you can get your electrolytes, your minerals from the water transdermally while you're doing the ice bath. It's a wonderful little electrolyte boost. A lot of people favor the sea salts, but I think the sulfate is safer for the equipment than the chloride, and it won't interact with the ozone.
Very good. Well, you know, again, I've kept you for an hour or so, so I'll leave it there. But thank you very much. I really do appreciate all your insights and the great work that you're doing with these ice baths, and the research behind it is fantastic. It's really it's been quite inspiring actually, and it's helped me a lot over the years.
No,
So,
you're inspiring. I should be writing up your case study for my next book. I've got this uncommon cold, and it's only like 2.5 years old, but I already feel like the book is out of date, because the more readers that I talk to and the more stories like yours I get, the more I want to go in and do a second edition and say, hey, look at what happened to this person. Here's the mechanisms that explain it, or add biophotons, or add whatever the latest study is that came out that shows the importance of mitochondria, even to the exclusion of worrying about the human genome. Our focus in medical research is all messed up right now, and we need a lot more attention to the mitochondria. So I feel a sense of urgency, and you are motivating me to get back to work.
well, that's great. Excellent. Well, I'm glad I'm motivating you to do some more then. That's good. They're still in disbelief of how I did it.
Yep.
They're still, and of course, there's no way in hell they're going to recommend a all meat diet and ice baths and breath work and so on. But unfortunately, it's, at least I can show people what I do, and if they choose to implement it themselves, at least they can maybe
Correct.
Do something, or at least help themselves anyway. That's the way it is, I guess.
And what's the downside? You eat a lot of ground beef? Well, I mean, what's the bad part of this?
Yeah, that's it. There's really no downside, is there? I mean, you give it a try.
Yep.
What are you going to lose?
Yep.
So you might get a few months, you might not.
Correct.
Whatever.
There are really no promises, but there are so many successful stories now that someone in your state, stage 4 cancer, you had lymphoma, they got nothing to lose. Like they might as well give it a shot, see how they feel, give it a month or two. They don't have to completely turn their back on centralized medicine if they don't want to. They can do all the other things, and it will support themselves psychologically. It will support their immune system. It will support their metabolism, and it will improve the odds that they emerge through whatever treatment it is better.
Yeah, I think psychologically is a good point there too, because when you're diagnosed, they pretty much tell you there's nothing you can do about it except treatment. And that no matter what you do, it's not going to have an effect on the outcome. And that pretty much just takes all the control out of your hands, and you're just along for the ride, you know? So I think mentally,
tell you to go home and get your affairs in order. Exactly. Or they'll tell you all they can do for you is watchful waiting. What a
I was told I had like at best like 3 months without treatment. So it was like, well, there's just no point to bother, But if you are doing something positive like this, like cold therapy or doing whatever you do, at least you are trying. And that, I think, is motivating yourself to actually keep going.
You sort of suggested it earlier. The medical system is organized around the metaphor of a factory. It treats the human body as if it were a machine. And for surgery, this is pretty good. Hey, look, we can swap out your knees. We'll put in a new part. You'll be as good as new. In some aspects of medicine, the machine metaphor is okay, but not when it comes to metabolism, not when it comes to cancer, not when it comes to Alzheimer's, not when it comes to chronic illness. We are complex systems, and it's impossible to change just one thing in a complex system. This idea that the body is a factory lends itself to hyper specialization and oversimplification, and it's no wonder that it fails. What's been taken from us is the realization that our bodies can heal themselves. They need support, they need stimulus, they need nutrition. But when you give our bodies what they need, they know how to be healthy. This idea that we're all carrying some personalized genetic defect that our grandparents never even heard of to invent some new disease that came out of a DNA test is a bunch of garbage. The DNA is nothing but a cookbook library for making proteins. It's what turns the DNA on or off. It's the epigenome, not the genome, that really matters. And you know what controls the epigenome? The mitochondria. So when you give your body the healthy mitochondria, everything else in your body improves. It's a systemic effect, not a targeted effect. This is why exercise makes you smarter. Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. That's exactly right. Like, it's more like an ecosystem than just a piece here and a part, like a car where you just replace parts willy-nilly sort of thing.
Yep.
Like I said before, one of my favorite quotes is, there's more wisdom in the human body than there is in all of human philosophy. And
correct.
It stands true, and you are born perfectly. You don't need to add anything to it.
Yep.
So
what do you think? There's some kind of mistake? I don't think so.
After 5 million years of evolution, I don't think so. Yeah. So there you have it. Anyway, thank you again for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. It was great to finally meet you, and I look forward to hearing more of and reading more of your Substacks as well. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. All right. Let's stay in touch.
Did you know that as we age, our body's ability to repair and renew itself slows down? Stem cells are your body's natural repair team, replacing damaged cells and supporting healthy tissues like skin, muscles, and organs.
That's where Cirrul Stem Enhance Ultra comes in.
Users report more energy, faster recovery, and even better brain power. Ready to unlock your body's natural healing power? Visit dcfit.cirrul.com today to get Cirrul Stem Enhance Ultra.